The laughter echoed through the recreation hall of the warship Sovereign's blade, bouncing off the metal walls and filling every corner with its harsh sound. Commander Viral stood near the center of the room. His forearms crossed over his chest as he watched his officers gather around the holographic display screen. The Korath were a proud species, tall and covered in dark blue scales, with faces that looked somewhat like Earth's lizards, but with 6 eyes arranged in 2 rows. They had been fighting alongside humans for nearly 3 cycles now, ever since the 2 species had formed an alliance against the swarm, a mindless enemy that consumed everything in its path. The Korath respected human tactics and their strange willingness to die for each other. They admired human stubbornness and their ability to keep fighting, even when their bodies were broken and bleeding. But tonight was not about respect. Tonight was about entertainment. Lieutenant Keth stood at the display controls, his mandibles clicking with barely contained amusement as he scrolled through a collection of human cultural files. "You must see this one," Keth announced to the gathered officers, his voice high with excitement. The humans actually believed in creatures that transformed from men into wolves during the full moon. The image appeared on screen, an old drawing from Earth showing a half-man, half-elf creature howling at a bright moon. The Korath burst into laughter. "Impossible biology," one officer snorted. "How would the bones restructure themselves without killing the host?" "They called them werewolves," Keth continued, clearly enjoying himself. "And they believed the only way to kill them was with weapons made of silver." More laughter filled the room. Commander Viral allowed himself a small smile. It was good for morale to have these moments of lightness during a long war. In the corner of the hall, sitting alone at a small table, was the human liaison officer. Captain Marcus Cole was not laughing. He sat with a glass of water in front of him, untouched, his eyes fixed on some distant point that only he could see. Cole was not a large man by human standards, but there was something about him that made even the biggest Korath soldiers step aside. When he walked through the corridors, he had earned the Crimson Honor, the highest military award the Korath could give to an outsider, for his actions during the siege of Proxima. He had held a defensive position for 18 hours, with only 12 soldiers against a swarm force that numbered in the thousands. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found Cole still standing, covered in alien blood, surrounded by the bodies of his fallen squad. The Korath called him the one who would not die. But tonight, he simply sat in silence while his species' beliefs were mocked. "Here's another one," Keth called out, changing the display. They believed in vampires, creatures that rose from death and survived by drinking the blood of the living. The image showed a pale figure with sharp teeth and a black cape. How wonderfully primitive. An officer named Sorath laughed. Did they really think dead things could walk and hunt? Not only that, Keth added, but they believed these vampires were afraid of garlic, a simple plant, and they thought they could repel them with religious symbols. The laughter grew even louder. Viral noticed that Cole had finally moved. The human was looking at the screen now, his expression completely blank. "The humans have thousands of these stories," Keth continued, warming to his audience. "Demons that came from underground realms of fire, ghosts of the dead that haunted old buildings, witches that could curse you with a glance. How did such a superstitious species ever develop space travel? Perhaps that is why they were so late to reach the stars," Sorath suggested. "They were too busy being afraid of their own shadows." This brought the biggest laugh, yet Commander Viral decided to include their human guest in the conversation. Perhaps Cole would laugh at the foolishness of his ancestors and the mood would grow even lighter. "Captain Cole," Viral called out across the room, "perhaps you can explain these beliefs to us? What made your ancestors create such impossible creatures in their minds?" The room grew quieter as everyone turned to look at the human. Cole did not answer immediately. Instead, He slowly set down his glass and rose from his seat. The movement was simple, but something about it made Varel's secondary heart beat a little faster. There was a stillness to the human that felt dangerous. Like the calm before a plasma storm. "You think they were created," Cole said at last. His voice quiet, but somehow carrying to every corner of the room. "Were they not?" Kath asked, his amusement fading slightly under the weight of the human's gaze. "Surely you do not believe in such primitive nonsense, Captain. You are a man of science and war, not superstition." Cole walked slowly toward the display, and the Korath officers parted to let him through without really knowing why they did so. He stopped in front of the image of the vampire and studied it for a long moment. "Tell me, Lieutenant," Cole said without turning around. "How old do you think the Karth species is?" Kath was confused by the question, but answered proudly. "Our recorded history stretches back nearly 50,000 of your Earth years." 50,000 years, Cole repeated softly. "And in all that time, how many species tried to hunt you?" "Hunt us?" Kath sounded offended. "We are the Karth. We have always been the apex predators of our world." Cole nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he already knew. "Humanity has existed for about 300,000 years, Cole said. "Do you know what that means?" No one answered. "It means we had 250,000 years of darkness before we ever built anything you would recognize as civilization." Cole continued. 250,000 years of living in caves and forests, jumping at every sound. Building fires not for warmth, but because something in our bones told us that the light was the only thing keeping them back. "Keeping what back?" Viral asked, his voice more uncertain than he would have liked. Cole finally turned to face them. And Viral saw something in the humans. Eyes that he had never seen before. Was not anger, it was not pride. It was something much older and much more terrible. It was the look of someone who had seen things that words could not describe and had survived to carry the memory. "You asked if our ancestors created these creatures in their minds," Cole said quietly. "They did not create anything, Commander. They remembered." He walked past them toward the door, leaving silence in his wake at the doorway. He paused and spoke one last time without looking back. "You think we imagined monsters because we were primitive and foolish. The truth is much simpler and much worse. We remembered them because they were real, and some of us remember still." Then he was gone, and the laughter did not return that night. The days that followed were strange aboard the Sovereign's Blade. Commander Viral could not explain it, but something had changed in the air itself. The corridors felt different, the shadows seemed deeper, and the usual jokes and laughter among his crew had become forced and uncertain. The mocking of human myths continued, but it had lost its joy. Lieutenant Keth still gathered officers in the recreation hall and still displayed images from human folklore on the screen. But now there were nervous glances toward the doorway whenever Captain Cole walked past, and Cole always seemed to be walking past. The human had not said another word about that night, had not mentioned monsters or memories or any of it. He went about his duties as liaison officer with perfect professionalism, attending briefings and offering tactical advice when asked. But he watched them now. Varel noticed it first during a routine planning session. Cole sat in his usual seat at the far end of the conference table, datapad in hand, apparently focused on the tactical information being discussed, but his eyes kept moving to the Korath officers, studying them with an expression that Viral could not read. It was not hostility, it was not amusement if Viral had to name it. He would have said it looked almost like pity. This bothered the commander more than he wanted to admit. 3 days after the incident in the recreation hall, Keth decided to make another attempt at humor during the morning briefing. "Before we discuss patrol routes," the lieutenant announced with forced cheerfulness, "I found another amusing human legend that I simply must share. Several officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one objected. The holographic display flickered to life, showing an old sketch of a humanoid figure with horns growing from its head and flames swirling around its body. The creature had eyes that seemed to burn with inner fire and a smile that promised terrible things. "This is apparently a demon," Kath explained, his mandibles clicking with what might have been nervousness or amusement. The humans believed these creatures came from an underground realm of fire and punishment, and that they would rise up to torment the living. A few officers laughed, but the sound was hollow. Imagine being afraid of such obvious fantasy. Kath continued, gaining confidence. "Fire creatures from underground. What nonsense! Every child knows that planetary cores are simply molten metal and rock, not magical realms of, where did you get that image?" Cole's voice cut through the room like a blade, and everyone fell silent. Kath blinked in surprise. "I obtained it from your cultural database, Captain. It appears to be from ancient religious texts." "No," Cole said, and his voice had changed into something flat and cold. "That is not from any religious text I know. Look at the style of the drawing. Look at the detail in the flames and the proportions of the body. That is not artistic interpretation. I do not understand." Kath admitted. Cole stood from his chair and walked toward the display, his movements slow and deliberate. Every Korath in the room tracked him with their eyes, though none of them could have said why they felt suddenly tense. "That is a field sketch," Cole said, stopping in front of the image. "Military standard. Meant to record observational data for tactical purposes. See the notation in the corner? Those are coordinates." Viral leaned forward and looked more closely. There were indeed small markings in the corner of the image that he had not noticed before. "Who made this drawing, Captain?" Viral asked, his voice careful. "Her name was Sergeant Yolanda Rivera," Cole answered without hesitation. "Recon Unit 7, stationed at Mars Colony Epsilon." The room was completely silent now. "I remember the reports about Mars Colony Epsilon," an officer named Thrall said slowly. "The official record states that the colony was lost to seismic instability. A tragic accident." Cole turned to look at Thrall, and something in his gaze made the officer lean back in his seat. "Seismic instability," Cole repeated, and the words hung in the air like a curse. "Yes, that is what the official record states. Seismic instability does not usually leave claw marks on the walls. Seismic instability does not write messages in blood. Seismic instability does not leave survivors so broken in their minds that they spend their remaining days screaming in languages they never learned." "You are saying this creature was real?" Kath whispered, and his usual mockery was nowhere to be found. Cole did not answer the question directly. Instead, he slowly rolled up the sleeve of his uniform to reveal his forearm. 3 parallel scars ran across his skin, each one perfectly straight and evenly spaced. They were too precise to be battle wounds, too clean to be accidents. What made those marks? Viral heard himself ask. "Something that was not supposed to exist," Cole replied, rolling his sleeve back down. "Something that the official records say was never there. I know because I was at Epsilon when we sealed the tunnels. I know because I helped burn what we found down there. I know because I can still hear it sometimes in my dreams." Speaking in a voice that should not be, he walked back to his seat and sat down as if nothing unusual had happened. "You may continue with the briefing, Lieutenant Kath," Cole said calmly. "I believe we were discussing patrol routes." No one moved, no one spoke. A Viral looked around the room and saw fear on the faces of his officers. These were hardened warriors who had faced the swarm without flinching, who had watched friends die in the cold vacuum of space, who had never known what it meant to be prey. Now they sat in stunned silence, staring at a human who spoke of horrors as casually as others spoke of weather. "Captain Cole," Viral said finally, "what exactly are you telling us? What have humans been fighting all this time?" Cole met his gaze with eyes that had seen too much. You asked once why human mythology is so filled with monsters. Cole said quietly, "The truth is that we did not create those stories to explain what we did not understand. We created them to remember what we had survived. Every myth is a lesson. Every legend is a warning. Every monster in our folklore is something that killed enough of us that we had to write it down so that our children would know how to fight it." He stood up again and walked to the door. "Your species evolved on a world that was kind to you," Cole said, pausing at the threshold. "You became the top predators of your planet without ever having to face something that considered you food. You looked at the universe and saw opportunity and conquest." He glanced back at them with something that might have been sadness. "We looked at the universe and saw all the places where things might be hiding. We built weapons because we needed them. We created rituals because they worked. We remembered the old ways because forgetting meant dying. And now?" Viral asked. "Now we are out among the stars," Cole replied. "And we are finding out that some of the old things followed us here. Or maybe they were waiting for us all along." Then he walked out, leaving the Korath to sit in heavy silence. The briefing was never finished that morning. Commander Viral could not sleep. He lay in his quarters, staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows move as the ship's lights automatically dimmed for the night cycle. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Captain Cole's scars and the empty look in the human's eyes. When he spoke of burning what they found in the tunnels, it was nonsense. Of course, the Korath were a rational species. They believed in what could be measured and proven. Monsters were the fantasies of primitive minds. Nothing more, and yet Viral found himself rising from his bed and walking to his personal terminal. Alliance between humans and Korath had included an agreement to share certain military intelligence. As a commander, Viral had access to classified human databases that ordinary officers could not view. He had never bothered to look through them before. Human military records had seemed uninteresting compared to Korath tactical doctrine. Now he sat down at his terminal and began to search. At first, he found nothing unusual. Tactical assessments of swarm movements, logistics reports, personnel files, all perfectly ordinary. Then he stumbled upon a folder that made him pause. It was labeled Black Pass LMAs. The folder required the highest level of clearance to open. And for a moment, Viral wondered if he even had the authority to access it. But the system accepted his credentials without complaint. And suddenly thousands of files spread across his screen. They were incident reports. Viral opened the oldest one first, dated from over 200 years before humanity had even achieved faster than light travel. uneasy identity report 001. Classification: Black Som location, Research Station Theta. Earth orbit date: March 15, 2089. During routine maintenance of external sensors, 3 crew members reported hearing voices through their communication systems. The voices appeared to be speaking an unknown language, but produced measurable audio frequencies. Crew members Thompson, Reyes, and Okoro were sent to investigate possible communication system malfunction. Thompson returned alone 17 hours later. He was unable to explain what had happened to the other 2 crew members. Security footage showed all 3 entering maintenance shaft 7, but only Thompson, emerging Thompson, displayed signs of severe psychological trauma and was unable to form coherent sentences. He kept repeating a phrase in an unknown language. 3 days later, Thompson breached the station airlock without a pressure suit. His final words, recorded by internal systems, translated roughly as "They are still singing and I want to see them." Bodies of Reyes and Okoro were never recovered. Maintenance Shaft 7 was sealed permanently. INCID in status, unresolved. Classification: Black Som Level 1. Viral felt a chill run down his spine, which was unusual for a cold-blooded species. He opened another file. INCID and report 0847. Classification: Black Som location, Titan Station. Saturn orbit date, November 3, 2157. Multiple sightings of unidentified entities in lower maintenance tunnels of Sector 7. Entities described as humanoid shadows that moved against light sources. By surviving witnesses, security team of 15 sent to investigate. 7 casualties within first hour of engagement. Entities displayed immunity to conventional weapons. Energy weapons passed through them without effect. Projectile weapons produced wounds that healed instantly. Commander Sarah Chen ordered experimental protocol, Sunburst. All power in Sector 7 was rerouted to emergency UV lamps while personnel retreated to sealed areas. Entities showed extreme reaction to UV radiation. Visual records indicate screaming behavior, despite lack of audible sound production. Security Officer James Weller, sole survivor of original investigation team, began reciting what he claimed was a prayer of binding in Proto-Arabic. Other personnel reported that the shadows stopped moving while he spoke. Entities were destroyed through combination of sustained UV bombardment and continued recitation of the binding prayer. Weller, unable to explain how he knew the prayer, claimed he remembered it despite having no background in ancient languages. INCIDNT status: resolved casualties 7. Classification: Black Som level 2. Varel's hands were shaking now, but he could not stop reading. INCIDNT report 2341. Classification: Black Som location, Kepler 442b colony, New Eden. Date: June 19, 2203. Colony of 847 established on habitable world in Kepler system. All initial surveys indicated no hostile life forms on day 127 of colonization. Settlers reported hearing singing coming from the forest at night. The singing was described as beautiful beyond words and impossible to ignore. Over the following weeks, colonists began walking into the forest during night hours. They would return in the morning with no memory of where they had been or what they had done. On day 156, colonist Maria Santos walked into the forest and did not return. Search parties found her body 3 kilometers from the settlement. Cause of death could not be determined. There was no physical trauma of any kind. Medical examination concluded that Santos had simply stopped living with no apparent reason over the next month. 512 colonists were found dead in similar circumstances. No physical harm, no disease, no explanation. Survivors described the deceased as having given up or lost the will to exist. Colony was evacuated on day 201. Remaining 335 colonists were placed in permanent psychological care. Planet Kepler 442 billion was designated quarantine permanent. No further expeditions authorized. INCIDN status: unresolved planet status. Forbidden Viril stood up from his terminal and walked to his small window. Looking out at the stars, his people had traveled those stars for thousands of years. They had colonized dozens of worlds, fought wars against other species, built an empire that spanned half a galactic armament in all that time. They had never encountered anything like what he was reading about. He returned to his terminal and opened another file. This one more recent: INCIDNT report 4892. Classification: Black Som location, LV 223. Uninhabited system. Date: August 8, 2287. Survey team encountered organism matching historical descriptions of vampire mythology. Entity appeared humanoid, but displayed extreme physical capabilities far beyond human baseline. Entity showed immunity to conventional weapons. Wounds closed within seconds of being inflicted. Entity did not appear to require oxygen and functioned normally in vacuum conditions. Survey team suffered 80% casualties before Sergeant Cole identified effective countermeasures based on historical protocols. entity was neutralized through destruction of central mass, followed by exposure to compound derived from allium sativum, commonly known as garlic. Entity displayed extreme cellular breakdown upon exposure to the compound post-termination. Analysis indicated that the entity predated human evolution by approximately 4 million years. Origin and nature remain unknown in OTE. Sergeant Cole promoted to captain for exceptional performance under impossible circumstances. INCID and status. Resolved classification. Black Psalm Level 3 Viral. Stopped reading. Sergeant Cole. Captain Marcus Cole, the same man who now served as liaison officer aboard the Sovereign's Blade, had faced one of these creatures and survived. He had not just survived, he had killed it using knowledge from human folklore. Using garlic of all things, the commander sat in silence for a long time, trying to process what he had learned. Everything he thought he knew about humans was wrong. They were not a young and foolish species that had been lucky enough to reach the stars. They were survivors of something ancient and terrible, a species that had been hunted since before. They were truly human. Their myths were not primitive fantasies. They were field manuals. They were survival guides. They were the collected wisdom of 300,000 years of fighting. Things that should not exist. Viral closed the database and sat in the darkness of his quarters, watching the stars and wondering what else might be out there. Watching back for the first time in his long career, Commander Vero of the Korath Dominion understood what it meant to feel small. Commander Viral found Captain Cole on the observation deck. Alone in the darkness, the human stood before the massive transparent wall that looked out upon the stars, his hands clasped behind his back like a soldier at rest. The light from distant suns painted his face in pale white and soft blue, making him look older than his years. Viral approached slowly, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. "I wondered when you would come," Cole said without turning around. "You knew I would access the archives," Viral replied. "It was not a question I hoped you would," Cole said. "Your species needs to understand. The war against the swarm is not the only war being fought in this galaxy, and it is not the most dangerous one." Viral moved to stand beside the human, looking out at the same stars. "How long have you known?" Viral asked. "How long have humans known about these things?" Cole was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of ages. "The oldest human bones we have ever found are about 300,000 years old," Cole began. "But our fears are much older than that. Somewhere in the depths of our evolution, something happened to us. Something that carved terror into the very structure of our brains." "What do you mean?" "I mean that human children are born afraid of the dark," Cole explained. "We do not teach them to fear it. They simply know. They cry when the lights go out. They imagine monsters under their beds and in their closets. And we tell them that there is nothing to be afraid of, that the monsters are not real." He paused and let out a long breath. "We lie to them because the truth is too terrible for young minds to handle. The truth is that their fear is not imagination. It is memory. It is genetic memory, passed down through thousands of generations, warning them of dangers that their ancestors faced and barely survived." Viral thought about his own childhood on the Korath homeworld, a place of warmth and plenty where the young played freely without fear. "Your species evolved on a paradise world," Cole continued, as if reading his thoughts. "Mild climate, abundant food, no natural predators large enough to threaten you. Your ancestors looked up at the stars and saw wonder and opportunity. They dreamed of exploration and conquest, and humans did not." Cole's laugh was short and bitter. "We came into consciousness already afraid, Commander. The first stories we ever told were warnings about things that hunted in the night. The first tools we ever made were weapons. The first fires we ever built were not for warmth or cooking, but to keep the darkness back. He turned to face Viral, and the Korath saw something ancient in those human eyes. Something that had been passed down through countless generations. You want to know why humanity is so good at war, Cole said. You want to know why we fight with such desperation and ferocity. The answer is simple. We have been fighting a war since before we were human. Every generation of our species has faced things that wanted to destroy us, consume us, or do worse things that I lack the words to describe. The things in the archives, Viral said. The vampires, the shadows, the singing on Kepler 442b. Those are just the ones we have records of, Cole replied. There are others. Some we have never seen clearly. Some we have never survived long enough to document. Some we have locked away so completely that even the memory of them has been erased. Replaced with fairy tales and nursery rhymes that carry only the faintest echo of the original warning. Viral felt his mind struggling to accept what he was hearing. If this is true, why do humans not speak of it openly? Why keep it classified? Because speaking of some things gives them power, Cole said quietly. Because knowing their names can draw their attention. Because fear spreads, and widespread fear creates opportunities for the things that feed on it. He walked closer to the window, pressing his palm against the cold, transparent surface. There are things out there that have no physical form, but can wear human bodies like clothing. There are things that exist only in the spaces between thoughts and can slip into a mind that thinks about them too clearly. There are things so old that the stars they were born under burned out millions of years ago, and they are still here, drifting through the darkness, waiting. Waiting for what? For someone to notice them, Cole said. For someone to call to them, even accidentally. For a crack in the walls we have built to keep them out. Viral was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he had heard. Why are you telling me this? He finally asked, why reveal this secret now, to an alien species you have known for only a few cycles? Cole turned back to face him, and his expression softened slightly. Because your people are now our allies, Cole said. Because we fight side by side against the swarm. And because sooner or later, you will encounter something that is not the swarm. Something that your weapons and tactics cannot stop. Something that your rational minds will tell you cannot possibly exist. He stepped closer to Viral, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. When that day comes, you will need to know that there are ways to fight back. You will need to know that humanity has been doing this for 300,000 years, and we are still here. You will need to know that silver works against some things, and salt works against others. And sometimes, the only weapon that matters is a prayer in a language that should have been forgotten. How do I prepare my crew for such things? Viral asked. How do I train them to fight what they do not believe exists? You cannot, Cole admitted. Not completely. But you can teach them to trust their fear. You can teach them that when something feels wrong, when every instinct screams at them to run, they should listen. You can teach them that humans survived, not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we learned to recognize the warning signs and we never, ever ignored them. Cole walked toward the door, but stopped before leaving. Your people look at human mythology and see superstition and foolishness, he said. We look at your history and see innocence. You have never had to face the things we face. You have never had to remember what it feels like to be prey. And if we encounter these things? Viral asked. Cole met his gaze one last time. Call us, he said simply. Humanity has been fighting this war for longer than your civilization has existed. We know the enemy. We know their weaknesses. We know how to survive. Then he was gone, leaving Commander Viral alone with the stars and the cold weight of terrible knowledge. The Korath commander stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the infinite darkness of space for the first time in his life. He did not see opportunity or wonder. He saw hiding places, millions of them, and he found himself wondering what might be hiding in them. Watching, waiting, and remembering a time when the ancestors of humanity had been their food. The distress signal came 3 weeks later. Commander Varel was on the bridge when the communication officer announced that they were receiving an emergency transmission from a Korath science vessel, the Seeker of Truth, located in an uncharted system on the edge of explored space. What is their situation? Viral demanded. Unknown, Commander, the officer replied, her voice uncertain. The signal is automated. We are receiving no response to our communication attempts. Viral felt a cold sensation in his stomach, a feeling he had never experienced before his conversations with Captain Cole. Set course for the Seeker of Truth, he ordered. Maximum speed. They arrived 4 hours later and found the science vessel drifting in the darkness between stars. The ship appeared intact. There was no visible damage, no signs of attack, no debris field to suggest an explosion or collision. The lights were off, but the basic systems seemed to be running normally. Life signs? Viral asked. None, Commander. Came the response. Viral closed his eyes for a moment, remembering the incident reports he had read. How many of them had started exactly like this, with ships found drifting and dark and empty? Prepare a boarding party, he said. I will lead it personally. Commander, regulations require that you remain on the bridge during. I will lead it personally, Viral repeated. And his tone left no room for argument. Captain Cole was waiting at the airlock when Viral arrived with his team of 12 soldiers. You should not come, Viral told him. We do not know what happened over there. That is exactly why I should come, Cole replied. If it is what I think it is, you will need me. Viral wanted to argue, but something in Cole's eyes stopped him. This was a man who had seen these things before, who had survived when others had not. If anyone should be on this mission, it was him. Very well, Viral said. Stay close to me. The boarding shuttle crossed the empty space between the two ships and docked with the Seeker of Truth. The airlock cycled normally, and the team entered the dark corridors of the science vessel. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dim red glow, creating shadows that seemed to move when Viral was not looking directly at them. Spread out, he ordered. Search for survivors. They moved through the ship in pairs, checking every room and corridor. The vessel was designed for a crew of 50, and it should have been full of scientists and researchers conducting experiments and making discoveries. Instead, it was silent, not just quiet, but silent in a way that felt wrong. There was no hum of machinery, no whisper of air circulation, nothing but the sound of their own breathing and footsteps. Commander, one of his soldiers called out over the communication link. We found something in the cargo bay. You should see this. Viral made his way to the cargo bay with Cole close behind him. The doors were open, and inside the large storage space, he found the crew of the Seeker of Truth, all 47 of them. They were huddled together in the center of the bay, pressed against each other like frightened children seeking comfort. Their bodies were arranged in a tight group, as if they had gathered for protection against something that threatened them from all sides. They were all dead. There was no blood, no wounds, no signs of violence. They simply sat or lay or crouched in positions that suggested they had died where they were without ever moving or trying to escape, but their faces were the worst. Every single Korath wore an expression of absolute terror. Their mouths open in silent screams, their eyes wide and staring at something that was no longer there. Several had clawed at their own faces, leaving deep scratches on their scales. A few had torn out their own eyes, as if what they were seeing was so terrible that blindness seemed preferable. By the ancient stars, one of Varel's soldiers whispered. What could have done this? Then Viral saw the wall behind the pile of bodies. Someone had written something in blood. The marks were crude and shaky, made by hands that were trembling with fear. But the symbol was clear enough. Looked like a pattern of circles and lines that seemed to shift and change the longer Viral looked at it. The more he stared, the more it seemed to move, to twist. To reach out toward him, a hand grabbed his arm and pulled him back roughly. It was Cole. And the human's face was pale as death itself. "Do not look at it," Cole said, his voice sharp and urgent. "Do not think about it. Do not try to remember it. We need to leave. We need to leave right now. What is it?" Viral demanded. "A signature," Cole said. "A calling card. Something old, something we thought we had locked away a long time ago. It should not be here. It should not be free." He was already pushing Viral toward the door, gesturing for the rest of the team to follow. "Everyone back to the shuttle immediately," Cole ordered. And his voice carried a command that even Korath's soldiers obeyed without question. "Do not stop, do not look back, and whatever you do, do not listen." "Listen to what?" Viral asked, and then he heard a sound that was not quite a sound, a whisper that seemed to come from inside his own skull rather than from any external source. It was speaking words that he could almost understand, promising things that he almost wanted, telling him secrets that felt so important and so beautiful. He found himself slowing down, wanting to turn around, wanting to go back to that symbol on the wall and understand what it meant. Cole grabbed him again and pulled him forward. "Think of your family," Cole shouted. "Think of your ship, your crew, your duty. Stay with me, Commander. Do not let it in." Viral focused on the human's face, on the fear and determination he saw there, and he forced his legs to keep moving. They reached the shuttle and sealed the doors. Cole was already at the controls, launching them away from the Seeker of Truth before everyone was even strapped in as they flew back toward the Sovereign's blade. Viral heard the whisper fading, becoming weaker with distance. But he knew it would never completely leave him. Somewhere in the back of his mind, there would always be a part of him that remembered that sound and wondered what it had been trying to say. "We need to destroy that ship," Cole said flatly. "And then we need to seal this entire system. No one can ever come here again." "What was it?" Viral asked again. "What killed my people?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was tired and old. "Something that has been sleeping for a very long time," he said. "Something that should have stayed asleep. Humans locked it away centuries ago, but locks do not last forever." He looked at Viral with eyes that held no comfort. "Now you understand," Cole said quietly. "Now you know what we have been fighting. Now you know why humanity never forgets, never stops watching, never lets its guard down. Because the darkness is full of things that remember us, even when we try to forget them." The Sovereign's blade fired its main weapons, and the Seeker of Truth became a ball of fire in the void. Commander Viral watched it burn and finally understood what Captain Cole had been trying to tell him all along. Humanity was not a young and naive species. They were not primitive or foolish or superstitious. They were the survivors of a war that had lasted longer than Kara civilization had existed. And they were still fighting it even now. The universe was very, very old, and the old things that lived in it had not forgotten how to hunt. Viral looked at the human sitting beside him and for the first time saw not a primitive alien from us, young species, but a warrior from an ancient bloodline, carrying the weight of 300,000 years of darkness on his shoulders. And he was grateful, truly grateful, that humanity had decided to be their ally, because whatever was out there in the dark, the humans knew how to fight it, and that knowledge might be the only thing that saved them all.